Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're going to talk about and give an overview of special education law, IDF 504 and ADA. But first, just a couple of housekeeping things. You'll notice in your display bar, there's an area where you can ask questions. I'll pause periodically throughout this to check to see if there are any questions. I'm very lucky to have Kelly Smith on the phone here with us with Kentucky Spin that is in I'm Rhonda. I guess I should tell you all that with Kentucky Spin. And Kelly's going to help us with questions. And if we happen to not see yours, please don't worry. We can always work with you and help one-on-one. That's a lot of what we do, as well as provide trainings throughout the state. But also, too, you're going to see that there is a handout section, and not to worry if you don't see it in your display bar, because I know sometimes for some people it doesn't show up. So no worries, because we will follow up with this email that'll also actually have the evaluation link if you didn't have a moment after this is over to complete it. And it'll also have all the handouts within that email for you. So just to tell you a little bit about us, Kentucky Special Parent Involvement Network, we are all persons with disabilities and or family members helping one another. We do have, we are funded through the U.S. Department of Education under IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as a parent training or PTI for the state of Kentucky, and have been since Kentucky first received one back in 1988. So our role is to help parents, professionals, youth, to have the information, training, and support that they need so that they can live the best life and have, opportunities in abundance, just as we want for all of our children. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am one of 5 children, and my twin sister had a severe learning disability and was diagnosed as bipolar as an adult. And so she is our special angel in heaven now. And my brother in the middle has cerebral palsy and also is legally blind. And the youngest set of twins, my mom had 2 sets. I know she's more of a woman than me, I can tell you that. My youngest brother has ADHD. But the thing about all 3 of them, they're smarter than I could wish to be. And no matter if you have a seen or unseen disability, that doesn't mean that there are not great things in your future. And that's what we all want, right? No matter if you're a parent, a youth yourself, or a professional, is how do we help one another so we can be the best that we can be? It's very important that you understand that we are not attorneys. We do not act as attorneys, and we do not represent families. What we do is we empower families to effectively advocate for their children, and also for self-advocates to advocate on their own behalf. And we provide the peer support, which is so critical. And since Kentucky Spin was founded in '88, that has always been at the core of everything we do. We are families helping families, persons with disabilities helping persons with disabilities. So we are here to help and support, not to do it for you, but to help provide what you may need to be successful. So our agenda today, and I apologize, I'm a little congested. So just to kind of give you an overview, we actually are going to go over the overview of the special, the basic law of Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, or in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, or some people call it IDEA. It all means one and the same. We have tons of acronyms that doesn't help us a lot, and there's all kinds of different names that mean the same thing. So, and then we're going to go into the overview of the special ed process under IDEA, which many people are familiar with, the IEP in school, and then some of the procedural safeguards that are within IDEA. So let's kick it off here with the overview. There are three three laws, and these are federal, that that help students with disabilities in regards to educational services. So the three primary laws, and I'm a visual person, as many of you all know that have been on our webinars before, is in this picture, this was created from Find a Florida, another PTI, because there's a PTI in every state. And they shared this with us. And to me, it speaks volumes, and it helps so that we kind of understand, because a lot of times people don't understand, well, why do some children with disabilities qualify for an IEP under IDEA and some not? Well, this is, think of it as your big umbrella, 504 of the Rehabilitation Act and ADA. You're going to have a lot more students that are going to qualify under those than you will IDEA. And Section 504 is a civil rights law, and ADA is Americans with Disabilities Act. So there are a lot more that are covered under that. But know that if you qualify under IDEA and have an IEP in school for the age 3 through 21, that you are covered by all three laws. But always keep this in mind as we're stepping through here, the picture of the umbrellas. And it really helped me a lot to always go back to this picture because it helps to explain a whole lot. Now, I'm a bit OCD, excuse me. So it also helps when I can see the flow of things. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, and ADA, they are federal laws. Then you're going to have your Kentucky Administrative Regulations, or KARA, which is your state laws. Then you will have your local policies and procedures, which are the public school districts. Now, keep in mind here that the federal law always overrides or supersedes the state or local policies and procedures unless they go above and beyond in favor of the child, or within that federal law, they let either the state or the local districts decide. So there are different things because there is so much in the law. So it depends on the exact situation that's going on to know which one that you go by. And that's one thing that we can help you with in one-on-one, especially because all children are different, regardless of the disability that they have, and they are unique in their own way, just as the situations are. So just keep that in mind. And then in turn, too, the Kentucky Administrative Regulations overrides local policies and procedures unless they go above and beyond, or they let the districts decide. So there are going to be some cases that, as we kind of go through this, that I'm going to show you where that occurs, especially where they go above and beyond. Now, keep in mind, this is for children who attend the public school system. Again, there are some different things when we're looking at private school, but what we're going to talk about today is within the public school system within Kentucky. Now, also, it is important to know, in many of our families, as many of you know, Fort Knox and Fort Campbell are military bases within Kentucky. Now, the reason I bring this up is because just like on the chart before, right, where you saw the federal law and then you had the state, Kentucky is different in that the majority of the military bases right now that are within states, their school systems on the military base are run by their state departments of education, which would be, in Kentucky, the Kentucky Department of Education. That's not the case. In Kentucky, we still have the schools that are on base, they are run by the Department of Defense, DODEA. So just so that you know, there is a federal law, but then if your child attends school on base, you don't go by Kentucky administrative regulations and the local school district's policies and procedures. There are specific ones through DODIAS. So just keep that in mind as we go through here, because we do have so many of our families that are military families within Kentucky, and we can help you with that if you have some specific questions. But I just want to make sure that everybody knows. Now, keep in mind too, if your child attends school off base, that means then your child is covered under with the Kentucky administrative regulations and the local policies and procedures. So I just want to make sure that that is clear. Now, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, this is civil rights law, and it's not just for education or for school, and it prohibits the discrimination based on disability, right? You have to be afforded the same opportunities as non-disabled persons. Now, this applies to any agency receiving federal funds. And it doesn't mean they're receiving federal funds for for special education. This could be any federal funds. This could be if they get federal funds to provide school lunches. So anyone who does have that, and Kentucky Public Schools do, is that you fall under 504, and these rights would then cover you as well. Again, you got to qualify, and we're going to go through in just a moment about the differences in qualifying for 504 and IDEA, the IEP. And it's does not come with an additional source of funding. So the schools do not get additional money to provide this. And keep that in mind too, because in just a moment. And it does provide some procedural safeguards. Now, 504 and ADA's definition of disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one major life activity. So you are going to be, that's why the umbrella is much bigger than it is IDEA, because there are many, and I'm going to give you some examples here in a moment. It is much broader to qualify under the 504 and ADA definition versus IDEA. And it's that you show that you have a record or history of a disability. In some cases, it's perceived as you have a disability, because keep in mind, 504 is to make sure that you're afforded the same opportunities as non-disabled peers, right? So there's no discrimination based on that disability. So there could be cases where you're perceived as having it, may not have been diagnosed, and so you might qualify under that. Now, some examples of, because I love examples, is some major life activities would be caring for yourself. Walking, standing, talking. So it is very broad, and this is just an example of the list, and it's not limited to this. But you're going to see in a moment where under IDEA, it is much more specific. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is an education law. Remember, 504 and ADA is not an education specific. It covers education, but it is a civil rights so that you're not discriminated against, right? IDEA is a specific education law. And it's not enough just to have a disability to qualify, but it has to be, you have to qualify under the categories. And kind of just to kind of go down through here, there are different parts of the law. And it's important to understand them. I'm a little OCD and it drives me crazy, but Part C is early intervention in Kentucky is first steps are birth to 3. Then Part B under it, because they should have reversed it, but nobody asked my opinion, because if it's our little ones, I think it should go in order, but that's a total side note. But Part B is the public school system, which is 3 through 21. Now, another important thing to know is there's a Part D of it, and actually the PTIs, just like Kentucky SPIN is, the Parent Training and Information Projects, are funded out of Part D through the U.S. Department of Education under this federal law. And that's important because they see the need for the importance of families, professionals, and everybody to get this information. And so we are under that. So no, too, if you ever move to another state, there is going to be at least one PTI in every state. Some states have more than one, like California, Florida, where the population is much larger. But we can always connect you with the PTI if you were to move that could help you so you have that connection. So IDEA definition of disability. It's not just enough to qualify under a category. So they're going to be the categories I'm going to show you in a moment. But you have to qualify in one or more of those. And you must need specially designed instruction and related services. And we'll kind of go through that more in depth here. Now, on this, and I'm going to show you a reason. If you'll remember back to the beginning where I had said that the federal law always overrides or supersedes unless it goes above and beyond in favor of the child or lets the state decides. So here's a great example I'm going to show you all. Under the federal law IDEA, there are the categories of disability you're going to see on the left. Well, you're going to also see CARA, Kentucky Administrative Regulations, categories of disabilities on the right. Now, one of the things when IDEA was reauthorized, because technically it's supposed to be reauthorized every 5 years, but the last one that we're still under right now was in 2004. So when they reauthorized it, you'll see the fourth one down used to be emotional behavioral disturbance. The federal law removed the behavioral part. Kentucky went above and beyond, and you'll see right there, and we include emotional behavioral disability category. This went above and beyond what the federal law was doing, and we are so grateful that Kentucky did, because there are many of our children who may not qualify if the behavioral part was not included there. That's just one example of that. Now, just so you all are aware too, because if you'll remember back what I said, that if on our military bases at Fort Knox and Fort Campbell, if the child attends school on base, they're not under the Kentucky Administrative Regulations or under DODIS. So DODIS also has the categories of disabilities, and I wanted to make sure that you all saw those and had those as well. So before we continue here, I want to pause a moment to see if there's any questions, Kelly.
Not right now, Rhonda.
Thank you so much. One thing too that is very critical we want to go through, because FAPE, free appropriate public education, is a key part within these laws. And you will know that Section 504 states that the regular or special education or aids and services designed to meet the educational needs of individuals with disabilities to the same extent that the needs of non-disabled individuals are met. So again, in the public school system, think of it this way, that you're not charged for your child to be educated based on their disability. And it's very important to note that. And also in IDEA, it's very important, because the FAPE is the special education and related services provided at the expense, the public school system, under public supervision and direct without charge, and meets the standards of the SEA in conformity of the individualized education program, the IEP. Now, you know, when we were saying about, you know, all the acronyms earlier. So I want to make sure everybody knows that if anything says SEA, that's the state education agency, which in Kentucky is Kentucky Department of Education. Anytime it says LEA, it's local education agency, or sometimes you may see people listed as authority, but that's your local public school district. And for a child that qualifies under IDEA, FAPE is one of the key principles under IDEA. So again, I love the visuals so that you can see here that IDEA, it's an educational benefit, it's an education law, and it's ages 3 through 21 unless you graduate sooner. And this is for children who qualify under one of the 13 categories, at least one, and require the specially designed instruction and related services. 504 is equal access if you have federal funding and you meet the definition of disability. And also, too, again, you will see under 504 and ADA, if you qualify under IDEA, you're covered by all three. And ADA is equal access regardless of the funding. Like it doesn't matter if it's federal. So you see where our children are covered regardless of the funding streams. Now, to the extent and what's provided, that then is going to be dependent upon which one that they qualify under. Some key principles of IDEA, again, the FAPE, free appropriate public education, an appropriate evaluation, the IEP, the individual education program. Parent and student participation is very key in the federal law and in the state law. Least restricted environment, LRE, meaning all children should be educated with their non-disabled peers to the extent appropriate that is best for them, and everything done to make that work before you look at the alternate settings, right? It's to be an individually decided based on their needs, not their disability or the category they qualify under. So all children are entitled to the least restricted environment. Procedural safeguards, that is parents' rights under the law that you're given. Now, for children who don't qualify for IDEA but qualify under 504, a 504 plan will be written, and it's going to look at, and one of the handouts that's included in this is a very helpful document that Kentucky Protection Advocacy created about the 504 plan in the public school district, the public school system. The 504 plan is going to look at their needs to where they would provide reasonable accommodations to the students so that they have equal access to the school program and activities to meet their learning needs. So now, before we jump into here, I want to double check that there's not any questions, because we're going to dive into now the overview of the special ed process, which is the ages 3 through 21 unless they graduate sooner, in the IEP. So Kelly, do we have any questions?
We do have a couple. The first one is, what does DODEA stand for, the DODEA? What does that acronym stand for?
Perfect question. Department, and you will see on, let me remember, I'm going to scroll back here just a second. Department of Defense. I'm sorry if I'm giving you all a headache scrolling so much, but I want to make sure that, so it's Department of Defense Education Activity. So this is under the Department of Defense, and we can connect you with the actual federal law. And you're going to have this is one of the handouts that if you can't download now will be in there, but that only applies if in Kentucky, if they are attending school on the military base. But that's a great question. Was there another one, Kelly?
Yes, there's a couple more. The next one is there somewhere where I can get a list of special education acronyms?
Great question. And yes, we have that. And what I can do when we get off here is I will make sure we have one, and several other people have those, because I don't know about y'all, but there's an acronym for everything. So we will make sure when I get off of here that I go in and make sure that's included, the link to that, within the follow-up email that you will receive. But that's a great question.
All right, thank you. And one more. it says a slide stated that to be eligible for an IEP, a child must meet criteria in one or more categories and require related services. What is a related service, and what if my child only needs one or the other?
Okay, so a related service, we're going to explain what that is in just a moment, but they must require the specially designed instruction and related services. So you will be able, I'll explain that a little more in depth, but you qualify under the category, but as long as you need the specially designed instruction, because not everybody, an example is a related service might be speech therapy. That may not be appropriate for your child. It's all going to be based on their individual needs, but that is great questions, y'all. And if we don't completely answer that as we go through this, we'll make sure that we go over that again. So let me know once we kind of summarize that in a moment. Were there
Okay,
any
that's all.
other? Okay, thank you.
That's all for now.
Thank you. So this is the process that you follow. There is the referral evaluation. Again, I'm a visual person, eligibility, IEP placement, and reevaluation every 3 years. So a referral, who can do that? Anybody who has knowledge of the child or suspects that there might be a disability that they might qualify for can refer a child. What that is a parent, a family member, a teacher, anyone can refer a child. Now, what has to take place is that that there has to be parental consent to evaluate by the parent before the evaluation can take place. Now, it's very critical to understand that the consent to because there's a timeline. Here's another area that's going to be a perfect example to give you all of what the federal law says and what Kentucky state law says. Because when Kentucky Administrative when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was reauthorized in 2004, it prior to that did not have a time frame that an initial evaluation had to be completed by. And as you can imagine, the more guidance we can all be given, the better it is going to be. Well, Kentucky went above and beyond prior to that and did have a timeline in place, which was 60 school days. When IDEA was reauthorized in 2004, they added in there that the evaluation would take place within 60 days from the date of the parental consent was signed, unless your state had already put a time frame in place. Kentucky had, and because 60 days and 60 school days are very different, because 60 days is 60 calendar days, right? That includes weekends, summer breaks. But Kentucky already had in place a 60 school days. That's why in Kentucky, we go by 60 school days from the date the parent signs the consent to evaluate. Now, those 60 school days, especially now living through COVID, that also includes, regardless of the location, if it is a school day, regardless if they are doing it remotely, doing virtual, those count. That's a school day. And I've been getting that question. So just know that it's very critical if you refer your child or someone does, that you've got to get that parental consent to evaluate. Oh, so my I don't know what I've touched though. Sorry about that. Maybe it's deciding to move me on to the next screen. Is that it is important that you sign that as soon as possible, because we don't want to delay the evaluation, because we all know the sooner children receive services that they need, the better that they'll do. Now, I also wanted to include down here, because we have many military families whose children attend on base. DODEA has its own time frame, and under that law, it states 45 school days from the date they sign, and they call it parent permission to assess form. So if your child attends school on the military base within Kentucky, they have 45 days to school days to have that done by. Now, let's see, the evaluation. First of all, I do want to explain that the evaluation is not just going to be one means, right? It's not just one test. You're going to look at a whole variety of stuff, taking input from everyone who has knowledge of the child, the parent. And it's going to be a combination, right? And it could be that your child's been evaluated by someone outside of school. And it might be important that you share that with the school and for everyone to take into consideration. Now, that's not the end all be all, that is going to be the deciding factor that they get, that they qualify, but it's important to have those things taken into consideration. Now, it's important to know too that if you do not agree with the evaluation that comes back, you do have the right to request an independent education evaluation at no cost to you as the family. Now, you do have to follow the proper procedures. You can't just go take them and get an evaluation outside of school and bring it back. You have to request that through the ARC team, which is the IEP team in Kentucky, the Admissions and Release Committee meeting and team. You need to make sure you follow that. Now, something else that's good to know is that what will occur is not just for the initial evaluation, but one of the areas that above and beyond under the Kentucky administrative regulations that it's not just for the initial one. If any evaluation where it would be qualifying or requalifying under for the IEP, you do have the right to request the independent education evaluation. And what will happen is once you are on the IEP, at least every 3 years, if not sooner, some children need it sooner, will be reevaluated. Now, one of the things I want to point out in your handouts, we get typically asked questions. We compiled to where it tells you what the federal and the state law says with the parts underlined. So that handout that is in the handout section here and will be in the email will be very important and a great reference, because we get a lot of the same questions, and it actually doesn't show you like what Rhonda says is the rule, or Rhonda said this is what it's supposed to be, but it tells you exactly what's in the state and federal law. So that might be a helpful chart for you as well, because the evaluation information, not just for the initial, but those that follow, that information is also in that chart. Now, again, back to I'm a visual person, and my brother Grant does trainings and stuff with me as well. And he explains it perfectly, because he says it's like building a house. You've got to have the proper foundation, because if you don't, everything you build from that is not going to be balanced, right? Nothing's going to be right if you don't have your foundation right, which is your evaluation. We've got to make sure it gives a very true picture of our children, and making sure that we are collecting all that we need to make the best decisions. And on top of that, then you build the present levels. And then from there is when all of the other things, your support systems come in, and all of it together is going to be the IEP, the individual education program. I want to pause just a moment to see if there's any questions.
There is one, and it says, what are my rights as a parent with a child who has a 504 plan? So I guess I'm wondering, does that mean and you can clarify this if I'm wrong, but are they the same as the child with an IEP?
No, they are separate, because IDEA has separate guidelines and parental rights that are associated with IDEA. You still under 504 are entitled for your child, if they qualify under 504, for them to be given the accommodations and modifications to the extent that they would for non-disabled peers to create equal access. Now, that is handled through a different process in the Office of Civil Rights. So what we can do is we can follow up, and I'll also include in the links that I send, because that's a great question. But it depends on exactly the parts that you're talking about. There is Whitney Hayes with Protection Advocacy was our guest on one of our webinars. It was specifically about 504, and I'll also include that link to that helpful video as well. But we can follow up afterwards and see the exact situation that's happening, and we can help walk through that. But yes, you do have rights, and it's the civil rights, but it's not the same guidelines and the rights that the specific education law provides, which is IDEA. I hope that helps.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go on here. So IDEA requires that within the IEP that there be a statement of the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. What that means is it's to give a picture of where your child is right now compared to their similar age non-disabled peers. What are the areas in I think it's just as important, if not more important, to know where our children's strengths are as to the areas that they may not be at the same level with their same similar age non-disabled peers. Because our children are no different. You need to use those strengths to help with your weaknesses. I do that every day in my life, and all of us do. So it's very important that we get a true picture. We see where our strengths are for our children, and then also the areas that they need help and there may be some struggles. It is very critical that if it is important, it is in the present levels of academic and functional performance, because your present levels, or some people may call them PLOP, is that they are going to guide the writing of the rest of the IEP, right? So if you remember the picture of the house where we've got our foundation and then our present levels, the evaluation helps to create the present levels. And again, the evaluation is not just going to be one score on one test. It is going to be a collection of things. And we want to make sure that it gives a true picture of our children, because that's going to guide the writing of the appropriate program for our child. You're going to look at these different areas and make sure that under that, and you're going to do compared to the similar age non-disabled peers, where are the areas that they may need some assistance with? And it's not just academic, it's functional too, because all of these things play an important role in their being educationally successful. Social and emotional plays just as an important role as academic, a letter grade that a child is earning, right? So it's not that you just look at one certain area, because all of these areas combined is what helps children, regardless if they have a disability or not, helps them be successful. Communication skills is a critical, important one, because if a child doesn't have a way to communicate, regardless if they can do it verbally or not, it doesn't have to be verbal, but if they don't have a means to communicate, that is going to affect them in every area of their education, because everybody needs a way to communicate. And for some children, it may not be because they're nonverbal. It may be that they're not able to get it out in words. So really looking at individualized, because it's important to understand the categories of disabilities for a child to qualify, right? But a category of a disability should not dictate what a child's IEP is or it is not, because it is to be individualized. Now, it is going to require the goals. So these are going to be goals that are going to be created based on what was identified in your present levels of academic and functional performance, right? Areas of where they were not at with their similar age peers. So it's going to, and again, you know, my brother and I, when we present, I'm the visual person. So your goal is, how do you get from the first floor to the second floor, right? So there's going to be a bunch of steps in there, but it is how you get to that next floor. Now, benchmarks and objectives, they are going to be what are your steps that get you there, right? So they will be in sequence, and you want them to increase in difficulty and modify, increase expectations, because we want our children to keep improving and building upon what the previous was. That's how they're going to get to that second floor. So on this, though, I do want to make sure that you are aware of, because in 2004, when IDEA was reauthorized, they removed the requirement, unless it is a student who qualifies for alternate assessment, they aren't required to have objectives and benchmarks under the federal law for every student. Kentucky administrative regulations lets the districts decide. But from the majority of the IEPs since 2004 that I've seen and we've gone over, everybody has included them, regardless if it was child that qualified and was on the alternate assessment achievement track. So, but know that it's not a requirement under that, because I think the benchmarks and objectives actually help, so we all know the steps, and regardless if you're a parent, professional, it helps us to move our children up the steps and see what our next step is to be. But I did want to make sure that you knew that it was only required under federal law if they're on the alternate assessment. Now, IDEA also requires that there be, again, the statement of special education and related services, and looking at the specially designed instruction for them. What is it that they need? It's going to have to be something that was identified in the present levels, again, remember, and then also what needs to be provided by a qualified special education teacher. So there are going to be different things, and depending upon each child, it's going to be different. One of the examples here where it says instruction in Braille, I can give you a perfect example of my brother Grant that presents with me is legally blind, but he can see some things. But because of his physical disability with the cerebral palsy, Braille was never appropriate for him. So just because it might be something that is used for some people who may be blind, it may not be what's best for everybody. That is the great thing about IDEA and IEP, is it is to be individualized based on your child's needs and services that they need to be successful. Because a lot of times I'll get questions, well, can you do this? Well, if the IEP ARC team decides you can, and as an ARC team, a parent is a critical, important, equal member of that, if it's decided to do it, you can do it. And so sometimes it's very hard when it's not in black and white, but it's a good thing too, where we can be individualized for our children's needs. So here's where we come to the related services. And I know we're getting close on time here. There's so much information. It is actually developmental, corrective, supportive services that help. You're not going to just have an IEP that just provides related services. That's not it. The related services is never a goal. It is support your goals, right? So if speech therapy, there might have been things identified under communication, and it might be appropriate that the related services you would receive to support the goal that was developed for communication, because that was an area in your present levels where your child may not have been at the same level with similar age peers. So the related service of the speech therapy is going to help them achieve that goal. So you're never going to just have one just for related services. But no, and again, I like examples. These are just a couple of examples, and this isn't limited to this again because it's individualized and it depends on the child's needs. Transportation is a related services when they require specialized transportation. And it does need to be noted in the IEP under related services as such. If they require specialized transportation, a lift bus, many, even if they're not in a wheelchair, they may need specialized transportation, even if it's not because of a physical disability. That would be a related service to be under, under the related services area need to be noted. So now accommodations, because there's confusions on the accommodation. So an accommodation that can be done is a reader, scribe, prompting, cueing, use of technology, braille, interpreters, extended time. Total side note too, these could be some accommodations that are also included on a 504 plan if they didn't qualify for IDEA. So because those things will help them. Now, it is this more specific under, because there's much more involved, but having the untimed tested or, the extended time, I've seen many times that might be on a 504 plan. But these are some accommodations. And again, there's always going to be an area that says other because it depends on what they need and what's going to serve their purposes and help them. So a lot of times there's confusion about a modification and an accommodation. A modification is a change from what's being taught or expected. Usually a modification is making the assignment, say, easier, but adapting it to the same skill level, right? So we're modifying the work. An accommodation is a change so that they can overcome what's stopping them from being able to do it. So modification, you modify the work. An accommodation might be that you have unlimited time to complete that test you may be doing. That really, because I think it's important that we go over that. Now, again, I explained in the beginning the least restricted environment to the maximum extent appropriate. All children would be with their non-disabled peers. If that is not what's appropriate for them, then you look at the alternatives, and it's going to be a mixture. Every child's different, and where it is best for them needs to be that decision made on an individual basis. But it does have to be specifically stated in the IEP why and when and for how long will they not be in the inclusive setting, meaning in the least restricted environment with their non-disabled peers. Also, too, so you will review at least annually the IEP. There'll be the annual meeting, but you can request one at any time. Now, I want to go over, because I know we're getting close on time, I want to go through the procedural safeguards here just a few moments before we ask for more questions again. So these are some important critical things to know. IDEA procedural safeguards for families. That every student eligible has equal protection. So regardless of the category that a child qualifies under, you have equal protection under that law. It's not that if you qualify under this category, you have more rights than a child who qualifies under another category. That's not it. There are equal protections under that. And as part of the procedural safeguards, schools must give parents a copy or ask if they would like a copy of the procedural safeguards at least once a year that outline your rights. The consent to evaluate for the initial evaluation and the other evaluations you also too, if the evaluation comes back, is to agree for them to receive the special education services. Prior written notice about meetings, access to records. We already talked about the independent education evaluation if you're not in agreement with the evaluation that comes back. And there are procedures for placement changes. So there are things that need to be followed, and it sets forth in IDEA and in the state law. There are some things that are in the procedural safeguards, which are rights to be aware of, is you do have the right to request mediation. Now, what this is if mediation, both sides have to agree. So if you're not in agreement, before you would get to any of this stuff, there are some other things in working with everybody. But know that if you're not able to get the resolved, I would strongly suggest that you try all other means before this, but know that this is always your right and it's always your decision as a family to access these procedural safeguards. Now, if you request mediation, you and the school both have to agree, because no one's going to come in and make a decision for you. A trained mediator, what will happen is there's a form the school district will fill out and send to the Kentucky Department of Education. They will send in an impartial person, meaning it will not be an individual. They will be trained in mediation, and it will not be an individual from your school district or surrounding counties. They are coming in to sort of help. Sometimes it helps someone that's maybe not in the thick of things. I've noticed this in my life, whether it's about this or other, that they can come in and really maybe help you all to come to an agreement. You do also have the right to file a state complaint. Again, many of the times when you go to these different levels, they're going to ask you if you've tried the level before. So you do have the right to do that. And we can provide you with more information on any of these if you would like. Then lastly, which should be a last resort, but again, it's your decision, is due process. This is a court proceeding, and there will be a hearing officer who will make a decision based on the facts. Now, anyone that I've ever known that has went to this level, in the end, regardless of who wins, nobody really wins once it gets to this point. So trying to work and know that you have these rights, but try to see if there's a way, instead of having to go to those next steps, that we can work it out and come to not just a compromise. There are things that you're going to know that are right for your child and that you have to stand on. But really working together and building that partnership, even when we do not agree on things, is what's going to be critical for our children to be successful. And know that too. I understand it's easy for me to say this, but we have lived it and are living it, and I know that it is very difficult on all sides, and especially now with COVID. But any way that we can help you so that you know your rights or the process, that we are here to help you, regardless if you're a parent, professional, anyone involved, a youth, so that you understand what the options are and what the process would be. Before we take some questions here, I just wanted to let you all know that every Tuesday we have a webinar, our Tuesday tips, and then on Thursdays, like today, we have on a variety of topics. And you can also check out on our webpage. We have a COVID webpage that we house the latest, not just educational guidance, but specifically education too, from the U.S. Department of Education, Kentucky Department of Education, because we know things are just, we're all living through a different time. So we have tried to make that easier to be able to access all of that critical information. We do have an e-news that we send out periodically. You can sign up for that. Now, we will be having at the end of this month, and you can find it on our calendar of events on the website, we will be having a more in-depth workshop at the end of this month on special education process under IDEA, and dive a little bit deeper if you'd love to join us. But let us know. We are here to help. I want to see if there's any questions that anybody may have.
I'm not seeing any, Rhonda.
Okay, well, we are so grateful that you all joined us. And if you could, please take a moment to fill out the evaluation once this closes out. You'll be prompted to. We value your feedback greatly to help us to do better. and also to help us plan. We are constantly um, bringing different information, different guest speakers to really help and provide the information that is most needed now. So please give us your feedback. If you don't have a moment, remember there'll be a follow-up email that has that, and we'll also include your handouts. You all have a great day, and we're so thankful you joined us, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.